Hello, all. Hope you're all doing well. We're continuing this week with our weekly portion review, and we are in the portion of Shelach Lecha. This is similar to Lech Lecha, which we heard with Abraham. Go for yourself. So this is send for yourself, and this is a jam-packed portion. The name is in reference to sending the famous 12 spies to go assess the land of Israel. And we also speak about the fringes on our clothing, the tzitzit that I'm sure you've seen in the past. And we have the famous story of the Sabbath violator. And that's what I want to focus on a little today. And just because it's a very strange uh, uh, story that comes up, which is why the punishment for him gathering the wood on the Sabbath is so severe. Now, Maimonides, the Rambam himself, asks this question and brings it up in his famous work, philosophical work, The Guide to the Perplexed. And he mentions that Moses over there ultimately ends up executing the Sabbath violator. And now, to clarify the question we had about why this is so severe, even though the written Torah explicitly states that anyone who desecrates the Sabbath needs to be put to death by stoning, the oral Torah reveals to us that such a situation is nearly impossible to actualize. And this is because the numerous conditions that are needed to be met simultaneously are very low as far as probability to actually occurring. We mentioned also in the past how a lethal Sanhedrin, a Jewish court, would sentence someone to death once every 70 years. Some people say once every 7 years, but either way, it's to stress how rare that actually happened, and to the extent that in order to be punished by death, a person essentially needs to surrender themselves to death in front of witnesses, and even then, there are some conditions that doing so would render you insane, and there too you'd be spared from the death penalty. Now, it seems that the text wants to emphasize the severity of the act itself, combined with the practical fact learned from the oral Torah that the likelihood of the death penalty is extremely small. Now, nonetheless, it's necessary for the stoning punishment to be carried out once in history. Now, Maimonides explains that this needed to happen to demonstrate the importance of the belief in the fundamental principle of the world's creation, right? That the Sabbath really serves as it testifies to the world that it was created in 6 days, and we have the seventh day of rest, and all the theological and philosophical meaning behind it. Now, it's really to impress upon us the seriousness of this matter, right? And that means once in human history, there actually had to be one person that was stoned for desecrating the Sabbath, right? And this was done by Moses, right, the master of all the prophets. And from that time on, it's basically till the end of all the generations were symbolically exempt from actually stoning anyone else on Sabbath. And this dual principle really guides us in the study of the entire Torah. And the Torah is given to us through two different channels. At times, it's the written Torah telling us things explicitly and bluntly, while the oral Torah tells us sometimes the exact opposite, right? And interestingly, we find that the societies that have really championed the idea, like in France, of liberty, peace, and fraternity, have not actually actualized this message. Sometimes it's even on the contrary. But in the Torah, it sometimes shows us how there's no liberty and there's no equality and there's no fraternity, precisely to allow the oral Torah to then realize them in practical law. And for an example, morally and ethically, the true compensation for taking someone's eye might be to take the eye of the offender, right? Because that's the only way, if if the injured party should see the offender's party as his own. And just like he wouldn't remove his own eye, he shouldn't do it to someone else. However, in the oral Torah, we have an innovation that the monetary compensation is given instead of taking an eye. Now, let's imagine the Torah had written not an eye for an eye, but money for an eye. This would indicate like a great distrust and disdain even for the eye of another. Therefore, we have to have these two different channels of communication. The written Torah, which is strict in its language, and the oral Torah, which shows more flexibility. And together, they ensure that the laws are both respected in principle and applied with humanity and practicality on the ground. And this dual approach is essential for really our holistic understanding and implementation of the Torah's teaching. I want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom, and to remember when you are facing life's challenges, to understand that we have our written commandments, and we also have how we apply them through our sages and our old Torah. And it's very important to always be looking through both those lenses, toggling between them. Shabbat Shalom.